Hello, everybody. We're advised to start. For those who don't know me, I am Frédéric Hugues, the former president of Eurate Power. So no need to say I am very happy to be here with you today. I am also a little bit anxious. The first reason why is that I am wearing a green jacket, and you learned this morning that this is just terrible. By the way, I saw other interesting things this morning in the very nice show we had. One of them is at one moment these words appeared, think the unthinkable. And the next word was, did you notice? Sunshine. Well, I guess this is British self-derision to its utmost. Is it, Paul, or is it something else? And another one, I'm not sure I could notice any picture of district heating. Maybe I was not attentive enough. But I saw one, I think it was photovoltaic panels. And the next slide or picture, they were destroyed. Well, we don't do that, do we? We don't throw stones at PV panels. So that was really strange. And I hope it's not a flavor of our debate. But this is going to be the second debate today. And I would like to have slightly more questions than in the previous one. So please do not forget to use slido.com, hashtag EHP Monday, and you can prepare them from now on. Now I would like to introduce our speakers. The first one is Brian Van Matisen. Most of you know Brian from his work on Heatromap Europe. He's the coordinator of Heatromap Europe. Brian is a professor of energy planning at Aalborg University in Denmark, and his works embrace much more than district heating, actually. He's one of the world's leading researchers on renewables, on renewable energy systems. Next to him, Laurent Schmitt. Laurent Schmitt has held various positions in the electrical equipment industry. He's very much he has a great knowledge on smart grids, but today he's the Secretary General of ENTSO-E, that is the European network of transmission system operators. Next to him, Gert de Blok. Gert de Blok has been in the energy industry, energy utilities to be more precise, since '92. He's today one of the front players of the Brussels energy scene. He's Secretary General of CEDEC. CEDEC is the European Federation of Local and Regional Energy Companies. That is to say, more than 1,500 local utilities with a total turnover of 120 billion euros, and they claim to have 85 million electricity and gas customers. I didn't see anything about district heating, but I know there is. But it's not on the paper. And last but not least, Bill Watts. Bill is senior partner with Max Fordham. Max Fordham are a building services engineers company. Bill describes himself, I hope it's not an understatement, it's just the reality. He describes himself as being skeptic about district heating. He actually wrote to put a case against the use of district heating in the United Kingdom. Now, you could think that he's one of these guys who's a traditionalist, he thinks of energy in the old terms, but not at all. It's just the opposite, actually. He's currently involved in the Sahara Forest Project, which aims at starting with sun again, to get food, energy, and water. And his basic interest is to study the viability of various energy systems, starting with what buildings are really and how people interact with them. So you see that all of our panelists are interested in energy systems, which is good because we think that once you start with energy systems, you're bound to finish up with district heating and cooling as being the best solution, but probably they do not think exactly the same. So now we come to the topic of our debate, which is very simple. The future. What is our low energy future? And in this so-called round table, well, you can see that we have 4 round tables for the price of one, actually. But in this so-called round table, we will proceed the following. I will first ask each of you in 3 minutes to give the audience your vision of the energy future, the rationale for that, why is it so, and perhaps more specifically, how heating and cooling needs are addressed in this vision, and which room there is or not for district heating. And then we will jump directly into the Q&A session for about 3/4 of an hour, and this is why it is very important that you start preparing your question. So now we start, and I will like to start with you, Laurent. Is it true that we are aiming to 100% electricity, or is it your vision, or do you have another one?
Okay, so a few words on where I'm coming from. My expertise is on energy management on large energy systems, primarily from an electrical point of view, but as what was said just before being an NSOE, I did a lot of work into a smart city environment, where I was always surprised to see how district heating was brought as an element of the energy mix in a smart city to basically cope with the rest, which is the electricity and facilitate interaction together. So thanks for inviting me to be here today, and one of the reasons why I'm here is because I thought this was an interesting link with what I was doing in the past from that perspective. Moving forward now on what we see happening in the electrical system is really a strong decarbonization trend. I think you are all aware of that. We are talking now going beyond 30% in 2030 on a whole energy system point of view. That means on the electrical system means going beyond 50%. And so that typically raised new issues on balancing the electrical system. And that's why our main grid operator are in charge of, so the transmission system operator, through the management of markets, energy markets, balancing markets, to be able to get all these distributed energy resources working together. So now if I take my lenses of the future, what we see clearly is that we see grid operator at some stage would hit the limit of what traditional electrical system will be able to absorb in terms of intermittency of that renewable energy. So that means we are today looking at new levers for flexibility into our energy system, electrical system for balancing the system. And obviously here we need resources which are flexible in interacting with the market, which are fast enough to supply what we call grid services. So basically supply of reactive power for those who are specialists on the electrical side, but also very fast reserve to avoid blackout in the electrical system. And of course, the existing units in the system are the one which we are looking for, and these units are particularly the what I would call the conventional generation units, being today connected in the system, or the new ones to be built, typically combined heat and power, being of course connected to heat usage and electrical usage, because we all know that the most efficient way from an energy point of view is combined cycle, and so the keen interest of looking at a technology like yours in the future. I think we are all exposed to what we say in our world, the prosumer. So the prosumer is this kind of consumer, being an industrial consumer or a private end-use consumers being ready to interact with the electrical system through real-time pricing. And here I think the challenge which we see appearing is we call it the microgrids at the interface of our main grid system, which are entities, typically private entities, being able to respond to price signal and to offer new services into the electrical system, which I suppose will significantly change the way combined heat and power district heating is being used, while it was primarily driven through heat in the past and the usage of baseload heat. I think we would like, if possible in the future, this system to be used as flexibility units through the peak, which is then questioning new challenge, mathematical, statistical data challenge in being able to model in the same time usage of heat from prosumers as well as usage of electricity from prosumers. And so here we see ourselves as grid operators being a data provider in the future to facilitate the optimum operation of all these units being interconnected to the electrical system. And we see the electrical system as a vector to facilitate co-optimization of usage across the entire energy system. So that's how we see our future and how we would like to play a role in the future system, and we hope the district heating will be a player in the future of that system.
Thank you. Maybe a follow-on question. Eurelectric published a roadmap a few years ago. Do you support this roadmap? And to be perhaps a little harsher, do you believe that the future is going to be 100% electrical, as was suggested in the program?
So we believe it's going to be much more electrical application, and I did not mention transportation, but we see electrical vehicle being obviously also a new trend into the system. But we do see, I think, a strong roadmap for the build-up of the electrical system. That does not mean that it is totally outside the rest of the energy, because what we see as well is there is much more need into coordination of the gas and electrical network, because what we see clearly during crisis situation in Europe, we see basically shortage of gas being a risk to the electrical system, or the electrical system having an impact on the rest. So I think, yes, we see more infrastructure for electricity in the future, but in a coordinated manner with the rest of the gas network particularly.
Thank you very much. What about you, Gert? Do you have any expectations from the transmission system operators, such as the ones which were developed by Laurent?
Well, maybe first of all, you mentioned the number of customers that we represent for electricity and gas as being 85 million, not mentioning the district heating and cooling. Well, there is one explanation for that. Originally, we had electricity and gas customers, and it was through the whole discussion of the last years with the change of the energy system going from a centralized to a decentralized system that we have attributed a lot more attention to district heating, which most of our members also run at a local level. Typical company is running electricity, gas, and district heating, is not only working on the infrastructure, but also on the infrastructure, is working mainly on local resources. And I think here we have a quite fundamental difference with the position of NSOE, bringing together large electricity TSOs who in their actions very actively propagate the electricity-only model. And it has a bit institutionalized. It has nothing to do with what the Secretary General wants or not, but it has been institutionalized by the NSOE, which is the TSO Association of Only Electricity. We are something different. We think the best solution to give an answer to the challenges of matching electricity, energy and climate policies is working out local integrated solutions. And that's where we come to electricity plus gas plus district heating. Technology is developing. Of course, we had cogeneration. We will have more power to gas, power to heat. And here we think with the growing, strongly growing renewables part, we need more flexibility. And flexibility can be found in storage. Storage, not only batteries, but energy storage. And I think here is the clear link that we can make between electricity, gas, and district heating and cooling at the local level. So what we try to also integrate in future legislation and regulation is to make sure that there is attention for this integrated solution. What we fear is that we're going away from this and having a lot of attention, and the main focus is for the moment, and the whole legislative package that is on the table at EU level now is deep down is electricity only. And the key recommendations we make to the package is completely in line with what I described that our member companies are doing, is do not exclude pieces of the puzzle. The future energy system will be a multifaceted system, not some big interlinked entities. We want to get demand and supply and local infrastructure as close together as possible. We think there are the best solutions. Of course, it will be a combination with some form of European grid, but we think that a large part of the system will be at a decentralized level, and the debate today, we think, is fundamental. Do we go, does the regulatory system, the legal system support this trend that will be there, or will it slow this trend down and block it for 10 years?
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm not sure we heard quite the same thing from Laurent, you and I, Gert, because, well, I tried to have him say that he would like to go for 100% electricity, but he did not actually. What he said is that he was keen to sell to all of us, more or less, which was a clever way to get out. But let's keep that for the debate a little later. And in the meantime, I would like to turn to you, Bill, and to know whether you buy or not these ideas of Gert of integrated local solutions, including a nice district heating scheme.
Right. Okay. Well, it was. I was surprised to be asked to come here, and thank you for the invitation. My background is a practitioner of designing buildings, designing systems that feed buildings, and also looking at the broad view of why things are like they are and what's the best way of servicing those buildings. And that's brought me into conflict with the DH lobby and the district heat and the CHP lobby for that matter. And I wrote a paper in about 9 years ago, setting out why CHP wasn't such a good idea. And I think that has come to fruition, actually. That it is, with the carbon intensity of the grid now at, it's 175 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So a district heat, the CHP units that have been installed over the past few years are producing the dirtiest electricity and heat from any other source. So I'll just leave that hanging. So my brief was, what is the future? So just running through, I think heating load for buildings will come down with better insulation and also climate warming, but the better insulation takes money. That money has got to come from somewhere. It's CapEx, and one needs to be aware of that. Cooling load, I think, will go up from places that don't have cooling at the moment, and I think that's a consequence of global warming, potentially, but more importantly, increased insulation. There's going to be a revenge effect of better insulation, which means people are going to overheat. And also, we're going to be living much denser. As a building consultant, we can see hyper-dense developments going up in London, and the issue of acoustics, thermal comfort is going to come to the fore, and I don't see a way of avoiding active cooling. Although some of my colleagues say, oh, we've got to keep with natural ventilation. I can see that renewable energy from wind, and particularly solar, is just going to get cheaper and cheaper. At the moment, you can buy the power purchase agreements for solar energy from the Atacama Desert, which is quite a long way away, is $3 a kilowatt hour. And they haven't finished going down yet. So I can see that that solar is coming, and it's coming slowly but surely. Now, Personally, I think that burning waste and biomass will become less and less acceptable as the ecological and economic points come to fore. Bear in mind, I'm talking from a UK perspective here, please bear in mind, where we don't have huge forests that we can burn. We have to import that biomass. So I can't talk for areas outside, but you can draw inferences, I suppose. I can also see the cost of electrical storage getting cheaper and cheaper. Now, this isn't going to be driven by me or the buildings. It's going to be driven by the automotive industry, which has very deep pockets, and they can see the direction this is going in. And so the battery storage, for one, is being driven down fast and hard. And that is going to have an impact on little or us in the building industry, because we get the second-hand batteries, which are not quite so good, but still work okay. Electrical interconnection across continents, which will smooth intermittency, and both on the demand and the supply side. Now, I didn't think that was real until I saw a presentation from the Chinese national grid. That's a pretty big grid, the Chinese national grid, and they've got some pretty ambitious schemes. By 2030, they thought that some continents would be gathered. By 2040, they thought that all continents within themselves would be gathered together into grids. And by 2050, they had a vision of an integrated globe of energy moving around. This is by cables, superconducting cables. To my mind, if the Chinese are saying that, you better listen. So I see the source of energy for heating will shift from gas, as it is currently in the UK, to electricity using heat pumps that can also provide the cooling that we need. I do think that gas is going to be around for a bit to meet the winter heat peaks, because that's the cheapest way of doing it, and I don't think we've got the political courage to do anything too dramatic in this country. You might disagree, but I think we're going to be out of here soon, you know, the European one, anyway. So, there we go. That's gas. So we have a gas grid, it's great. And we have electricity grid, which needs a bit of work, but we're not going to get rid of it. We need it, and we need to upgrade it. So my view is, where does district heating fit into all of this? We've already got these vectors around, and my experience is that district heating has been largely missold in this country as being something which is low carbon and low cost. And for one reason or another, I think that they have failed on that promise. And that's with a great following wind behind them. And so I think there's a lot of trust to make up there. But let's say the quality of the installations gets better, so that we get our losses down from 50, 60, 70% down to a reasonable 20 or 30%. The fact is that the benefits of putting that in have got to outweigh what you could do locally in your own home or in your own building. There may be benefits, and we're talking about storage, we're talking about different things that are producing heat. I mean, if you had a nice nuclear power station nearby you, or you could make use of that heat, or a carbon sequestration plant, you could make use of that heat. But in the long term, we're going to be producing our electricity from renewables that don't have a byproduct of heat. So that's, I think, my conclusion.
Well,
I think I'll just finally say low carbon is often called expensive, but it's not. It's free, actually, because if you don't use it, it's not using the carbon is a free. It's not a cost. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Well, I think we share quite a lot of the premises, but probably I would come to different conclusions, but it's not my role to argue with you today, so I won't. And please, Brian, what would be your reaction as that? You are interested in systems as well, so do you see things in quite the same way or not?
I think I see a combination of a lot of things that has been said. So, and I have the fortune not to be in any kind of sector, so I can see things from a bit of a different perspective. In my opinion, there's something that we don't realize here. There's a generation that's younger than me, and there's a generation that's older than me. And there's a lot of people who would like to do a lot regarding climate change. And I think that there's going to be a push for doing something in the future that we cannot imagine right now. When we go to something less carbon heavy, or go towards maybe 100% renewables or large-scale renewables, in my mind there are two ways. There's a direct route, en marche, smart energy systems, or 100% renewables, and there's a detour. To my mind, it's not impossible to do 100% renewables. It's more a matter of when we want to do it and how much the cost should be. If we do the detour, we start to electrify the heating sector in the individual houses. In my mind, this is a detour because what will happen is that we will have to extend the grids to a level that we cannot even imagine. Now, this is not to say we should not use electricity in heating, because of course we have to do that. But you imagine we have 40-50% of our energy consumption is in the heating sector, and most of that is not electrified at the moment. So we want to, and 30% is in the electricity of our energy demand is in the electricity sector. So if we want to triple our electricity grid in Europe with renewables, I don't think this is a very good idea, because there are many other options that are much cheaper. If we want to integrate renewables, there are also a lot of things to be considered. And it is, in my mind, most people's opinion that we will have a shower in 2050, so somebody will need some hot water, and why not use this hot water as an intermediate, as a storage, instead of using batteries, instead of using gas. So not instead, but as a supplement. So in my mind, I think we have to look at all the energy vectors in different ways. And when we look at the costs, it is very clear to me that combining some kind of energy savings in the buildings with using excess heat from different sources, not only from power plants, but from many different sources, will enable a decarbonization of our buildings. I think we need to look at the facts. So the facts are that we find that in Europe we have more waste heat than, or at least the same amount of waste heat that we actually need for heating our buildings. If we look at the facts for the UK, we see this is exactly the same situation. Now, of course, in the future, the heat sources will be different, but I do imagine that we will have some production in the European Union and in the UK in the future. And in my mind, it is much cheaper to produce hot water and to find ways, also via electricity, to produce hot water than to use electricity. So, in my mind, we have to look at the different qualities of the electricity grid, of thermal grids, of the gas grids, and in combination with savings, we will be able to go towards a future which cost-effectively has transferred us to renewables. If we take the detour over electrifying the heating sector, I think in the future we will realize that it was cheaper to produce hot water in another way. But then, of course, we spent this money already, so it will take a while before we can bring down the costs.
Thanks a lot, Brian. I think we heard quite a lot, and I could almost sit back and let you speak together because there's much to argue. But rather than do that, I would like to turn to you. Do we have any question? Ines? Dana? Yeah. So. Do you mean that?
You know, when you do introduce the little question, you can write your name. So I do have a few comments and a few questions, if I may read them out loud. One is, if we put district heating aside, what is the most appropriate means of bringing large amounts of low-carbon heat into dense urban areas? The second one, can the power grid cope with increased demand for power and heat? And as a side comment, electricity market conditions today make it almost impossible to invest in building a gas power plant. And then, an electric, all electric, how to do this in terms of capacity. Example, in Germany, heating capacity in a cold winter is 200 gigawatt. Reliable power production today is 80 gigawatt. So what do we do about that? And then the last one, 80% of current buildings will be still there in 2050. Insulating houses for electrical heating is 5 times more expensive than optimal insulation. Who will pay?
Thanks a lot. Well, they are very clear questions. I would like, if you don't mind, to start with the last one, and especially raise them both to you, Bill and Brian. Can we agree on the level of reasonable insulation and decrease of consumption in buildings? You used a figure, Bill, which was going down from 70% waste to 20%, if that's right. I'm not sure we usually put it in the same way, but it might be the same figure that we have in mind. And I would like to find out with you what it means in terms of energy needs. And then we can see whether it's too costly or not to go for this solution or this solution. So both of you, and of course, Gert and Laurent, you are free to jump in if you like.
Yeah, I can start.
Yeah.
I think if we just take the facts that we found from the UK study, we found there are many, as also pointed out by Bill, many low-hanging fruits regarding insulating buildings. There's a huge potential for that. We found 40% savings from today. If we look at the level in general, now this may be a bit different in the UK. I would say the existing buildings should be below 100 kilowatt hours per square meter. So we really have a long way to go in many European countries. I would probably also say we have to go to 80 kilowatt hours per square meter. This goes very well in hand with district heating. It also goes very well in hand with heat pumps, because what happens is if you start to insulate your house, you reduce the peaks. And when you reduce the peaks, you reduce the capacity you need. You also reduce the temperature levels, which means that you can more efficiently use a heat pump on electricity and more efficiently use a district heating.
Okay, thanks. Bill?
I agree that we need to insulate. We've got the new stock and we've got the existing. The new stock, we've got a choice. As planners say you must use district heating, and by the way, you can pay for that by not insulating your building so well, which, by the way, knocks back your business case, so that's fine. Now, I think that's a little bit counter to what we're trying to do. Now, for the existing building stock, it is expensive to bring that to insulate your buildings. But again, the money can't be spent more than once. And I love your idea about the detour. I put it exactly the other way, that the detour is by putting in heating systems into buildings that have got high heat losses. And then you've spent that money once and you haven't got the money to spend on insulating your building. And your business case for the district heating system relies on a certain take-up of heat. So again, you've got a disincentive to reduce your heating load in the building. So I think that there's a slightly pernicious aspect to putting in an expensive infrastructure which requires you to use a resource that you're trying to save to pay for it. The percentage I was talking about is what percentage of the heat goes in is useful at the end. The amount of heat you put in at the beginning of the network, what percentage of that is useful at the point of use? And the analysis that has been wrung out of various people has suggested that efficiency, 80% of that heat could be wasted in the system. And that's a bad system. But the best systems are getting down towards 20 or 30%. But as you insulate your buildings, the percentage of the heat lost in the ground goes up. I mean, that's one thing follows another. However, there are other ways of avoiding that by using ambient systems and things like that. But I think I've answered the question.
Thanks a lot. I'd like to ask you a follow-on question. You said that planners tend to drive developers to use district heating in order to avoid costly insulation. And the way we usually hear these stories is different. We hear that they've tried the other way around, that is to say extreme insulation, and they realized that it was extremely costly. And therefore, they wonder why it wouldn't be a good solution to be a little less aggressive and then supply the remaining energy needs with district heating and cooling. And this leads me back to the same question I was asking you. Eventually, don't you agree on what would be reasonable insulation overall? Because it looks to me you do. So am I wrong? Have I missed something? And if you don't, why is it that one of you is still fiercely against district heating? Is it only because you fell in hatred with district heating 10 years ago? Or is it something different? And why is it that Brian still holds for it? And please, again, Gert and Laurent, don't hesitate to jump in with your own experience.
I think that there's only one pot of money. I take your point about it's too difficult to do passive house and too expensive to do passive house, but there are a lot of layers below that, or not quite that, which are doable. And actually, we're getting quite passive house. I mean, I don't know if there are any proponents of passive house here. It is the quality control is very good, and that's how you get good buildings. It's how you get good district heating system, is by getting good quality control.
Okay. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, well, it seems that Bill thinks that physics are different in the UK compared to elsewhere, because as far as I can see, the amount of excess heat and the amount of potential to heat well-insulated houses in the UK is for sure there. And to have the argument that it's that you can only invest in either district heating or insulation is completely wrong and very ridiculous, because there are different stakeholders that do once and other stakeholders who do the other. Actually, I would say it is extremely risky if we do not find this balance between the energy supply and the energy savings. What we saw the Commission did in 2011 in their energy efficiency roadmaps for the European Union was that they only had the focus on insulating the buildings, which meant that we could barely actually have a shower. I mean, they actually reduced the heat demand in buildings so much that we had to also reduce our hot water demand, which of course you could say it's a modeling mistake, but it's also a mistake that you don't look at the physics and at the actual costs of what are the levels of savings that should be made and how can you meet the heat demand with different options. Also, when you have this debate, it's important to understand that even though you insulate your building, there is a cost for supplying this building with either heat or cooling and hot water. And when you look at the cost of those units and the cost of supplying those units with electricity and compare that with the cost of using low-value heat, those costs do not add up in favor of the individual solutions, especially not in the UK, by the way, where we in the European Union find that we should have maybe up to 50% district heating in an ideal situation. Of course, there's an implementation phase in that. We actually find that in the UK, because you live so close together, that you will have a potential maybe up to 70% district heating. And this argument that we should use electricity or we should not we should not build new infrastructure is really counterintuitive, because you have an infrastructure on electricity and you are paying for that. You have an infrastructure on gas and you are paying for that. The only thing that you need to understand is it would be cheaper to take some of this cost and put it into a thermal grid instead.
Thanks, Brian. Yes, Gert?
I think we should not but keep in mind that the goal is CO2 down, down, down. And then how to get there, energy, no discussion. Energy efficiency has to be the first step, and all attention should go to that, including reducing energy losses you have. And so our plea for getting your generation as close as possible to the place of demand it goes in the direction of decentralizing systems, and the more you have energy efficiency, the less you will need an enormous transition towards renewables, but the more it gets feasible to get to the final target of getting CO2 down. And with, again, if you need more renewables, you will need, if you want to reduce losses, do it more local. Need for flexibility, need for storage, local. I think, so the one point is getting CO2 down and then start with energy efficiency and renewables and play local. A second one is cost efficiency, how to get there. And there, here on infrastructure, use existing infrastructure for electricity, for gas, for heating and cooling, and use existing or available local resources. And we have some that will be very cheap at certain moments. We have excess heat. We will have very cheap on the market renewables generation that is lost otherwise, that we could store, and cost efficiency must be, is one of the big discussions I feel we have politically. When we say we need a fast transition, then you always get the argument it costs too much. It costs too much if you isolate on one solution. If you try to make an integrated solution, the cost, and make use of existing infrastructures, local resources, it will drive costs down.
Thank you very much for making these points. I think we should now turn to the other questions which you raised, which were linked to the cost of electricity. And I think this will partly answer Brian's concerns as well, because what I heard from Bill is not that he said that we should move to zero energy buildings. He did even say that passive houses were not necessarily the goal, whereas I can remind you that passive houses, if I'm right, consume 50 kilowatt hours, which is not very far from 80 in the definition. So at the end of the day, it looks to me that the important thing is the real cost of electricity, and especially of renewable electricity or other renewable energies. And you could gather from the questions that it is not only a question of at what price can we purchase green electricity at the time it is generated, but it is much more than that. What is the real cost and the real value of electricity, because it is not, as we all know, generated at the time we need it. So, of course, we have to start with the needs, which, as it was reminded, are about 1/2 heating and cooling, and then go back to the best way to supply this. So I would like you all, but perhaps starting with Laurent again, to be very precise on your vision on, again, the cost and value, the real one, of renewable electricity. If it's going to be free, if it's going to be affordable, if it's going to be available, well, there's no point in discussing anything else. If it's not, well, let's take reality as it is and come to conclusions.
Yes, thanks for asking the question. I think this is really the fundamental element, is this having the right price and price indication at various locations in a grid in the country, so that we can arbitrate for the right decision against a certain building, a certain cities, And here I would go against what my neighbor says. We are not in NSOE in favor of building very large grids, simply because it's not feasible to do that. And I think we are much more pragmatic than that, and we recognize that grids do bring a lot of value, but it is also complex to build grids. And so, as a consequence, we must find the right balance between the integration of the distributed and local and between what is available on the wholesale. Now, going more in detail to the price question, no doubt, renewable will go very cheap into the system. Renewable offshore now, winds around, I think, around Holland is cheaper than nuke. Okay? The only problem is that it is offshore and it is the north of Europe. So you'll never go at that price. For a wind turbine being located around the city, it's not possible. And so I think the complexity of renewable is bringing renewables from the places where they are really cheap, so the places where you have either a lot of solar PV or a lot of wind, and interconnect them, I think, with the rest of the system, with the caveat of what I was saying, of building the right infrastructure so that we are able to do it. And here I fully agree with what my neighbor on the left said here. The problem which we have, it's hard and it's expensive to build large infrastructure. So basically, if we start to put heat pump and EV extensively in large cities like London, we are going to triple the size of the grids, and it's simply not feasible to do it. There is no size, there is no space, it is very costly, and so on. So here the question is, how do you get all these resourcing competing with each other into a consistent market system so that you exactly know the price of renewable in real time? And by the way, we all know that renewable is zero cost once it's installed, so price can come negative during some periods, as what we see in Denmark now quite frequently. And so getting this well connected with storage or demand response being located in the same neighborhood behind the congestion and the grid congestion, so that we can have this local balancing phenomena and being able to interact dynamically with the system. So I think that's the first element, is how to get the right price mechanism in place so that the entire energy system, together with the CO2 and the ETS, cost of CO2 onto the implied onto the production of the energy, well traded across these various areas. And I'm sure we're going to see that building in Nice, in the south of France, has nothing to do with building in Copenhagen, which has absolutely nothing to do with building in other places. Another element which was raised, very interesting question here, is the real-time price of energy enough? No, it's not, because what we have, what we call capacity, I would say pricing the energy is not enough. We also have to price the cost of the capacity during the few tens of hours of the year where there is no renewable at all into the system. And here, this is a place where I think we will continue to see spaces for more conventional resources. And I think we should also aim at the most clean resources as possible. So that means putting a certain CO2 cost onto these resources. And so here we are going to see fighting between gas, for sure, and maybe district heating units, but also the existing nuke, which is available within the system, which can be used during these few hours of the year when we need this extreme capacity. And by the way, storage or demand response can also be seen. I remind that building insulation is one thing, which is what I call the passive energy management, but you also have the active energy management, and you can also decide of having demand response strategy in that building so that during these few hours of the years when you have an electrical crisis in the system, you must have, I would say, a payment mechanism for the buildings which make the effort of reducing their peak during this time. So it's all about pricing these resources, and that's not a single price. That's a price between capacity, I would say, forward year, months ahead, day ahead, and real-time balancing, so that there is complexity around it, and all the complexity is around managing interaction and transaction here. And I think here our grid operators in the future will be much more market operators, facilitating basically optimization of energy efficiency across the entire value chain, and being much less constructor of large interconnectors, because unfortunately, these are sometimes hard to do, and we will still do it for sure, but we cannot as much as what the natural economics would lead us to do if we would stay in a pure, fully controlled economy like China. And I must say that China advocates very highly for big grids, simply because it's very easy there to secure land, and as compared to democracy, that what we have in Europe. So building grids in Europe and in China, we must be a bit careful here. Again, I'm a big advocate for grids, but we must recognize that there are obstacles also in building electrical grids. And again, it's a matter of balancing and designing the end-to-end system properly through a proper price indication at various locations in the system.
Well, thank you very much, Laurent, for this very precise, clear, and comprehensive response. Bill, do you want to react on that and tell us why you are so convinced that electricity is going to be almost free?
It's not going to be free. It's going to be. I agree with everything you say about it's the asset cost. So and you've got to match the asset to the load. So the cost is in how much interest you've paid for that asset, and how do you match the production and the load. I'm just talking about getting the energy into a city. By using district heating, have you changed, in what way have we changed things? If we're still going to be using electric heat pumps, or are we going to be burning stuff, or are we going to be using nuclear power to produce heat within cities? The point being made was the electricity grid won't take it. So that's the question. How are we going to heat the district heating networks?
Well, perhaps Brian will give the answer, but first of all, I would like to insist on what do you see driving down the price of electricity that much when you have to take into account all the costs that were mentioned by Laurent?
We're looking at, so if in the desert, the cost of the electricity is coming down to very, very low. You could say it would tend to a very low figure, which could be free. I don't want to use that term, but then you could start transferring that electricity into a chemical form through hydrolyzers, and then you would ship it to other places. This is being considered in Japan, and with Australia providing the energy to do that. So Japan is definitely going down a low carbon route of using hydrogen and renewable energy. It's not keen on nuclear, although it's still got them, and it's looking for other sources. I don't have the exact figures, but if there's an industrialized economy that's looking at this as a real thing.
Thank you. Gert?
Well, just on the question on price, and I would like to link with the discussion in the previous session on where market should be and where regulation should be, and the question is, we are talking in general, and this is for district heating, as for electricity, for large infrastructure. We need investments in infrastructure that have depreciation times of at least 20 years. And then the question is, will we solve it with short-term market signals from consumers who have a short-term interest and take a decision based on a short-term interest? And there, the question is, and what we also see is that there is a need for more regulation in different parts of the value chain. In generation, capacity remuneration will be necessary to guarantee certain forms of generation. Also on the grid part, we will need some form of capacity elements, not only flexibility elements that are also based on market prices. We do not think that market and price signals from markets alone can guarantee coordinated development of integrated infrastructures on the long term.
Thank you. Ian?
Yeah, I very much agree with what Laurent said. I think this idea about Desertec was abandoned many years ago by researchers. So I'm not sure where that is flying. I mean, of course, the electricity prices will go down substantially, and the question is, how do these prices meet the customer? Because at the moment we don't really have a very well-functioning market. The market is designed for short-term marginal costs and not for providing capacity when there's wind or when there's no wind and power plants are closing down. It's actually a rather big problem. Yeah. So I think the prices will go down. But having said that, I also very much agree with this idea about connecting sources of renewables with demand centers, because that is what we really need grids for. The idea of connecting demand centers that already have a lot of renewables with other demand centers that have a lot of renewables, this is where we maybe get into a bit of trouble, because that will not really help. That's like trying to sell ripe fruit from two countries when they're ripe at the same time. Regarding the district heating, I was asked a question. I think in the future we will have district heating from a lot of sources, and in the transition to that, I think we will have combined heat and power, and we will have the use of biomass. We will have the use of waste, but that will be a transitional period. Because in the future, I foresee that there can be many sources of district heating. If we look at the cost comparison of electricity from renewables and district heating sources, I think it's very clear that if you look at a merit order curve of heating compared to a merit order curve of electricity, that you will find that heat and heat sources are much cheaper per energy unit than electricity.
Thank you. Well, we are coming close to the end of this session, so I would like each of you now to tell us which are the main takeaways he would like you to go with, and perhaps as well if he will go out with some takeaways, which would be interesting. 1 minute no more for each of you, starting with you, Brian.
Yeah. Well, one thing I get out of this is that apparently the debate about Desertec and hydrogen for heating is not over. I think my take also from this is to hear Ensoe have a very nuanced message for us today is incredibly important, because we have the electricity basically saying that if we start to really electrify, then we really have to expand to an extent that is not really feasible, and that is certainly something that I'm happy to hear. Not because I don't believe we should use a lot of electricity in the future, because I foresee we should perhaps use 2 or 3 times as much as we do today, but we should just not use it for direct heating. So this I think would be my take.
Laurent?
Yes, so my encouragement would be to get out of the traditional frontier and say the electricity is playing electricity and the heat is playing heat and the gas is playing gas. The reality, it's all a matter of integrating infrastructure together. And at Ensoe, I spend a lot of time with Ensoe, the gas people, right now onto that topic. And I think what we need is build a consistent renewable energy system across all this energy. And I think us, as electrical supplier, we can bring our knowledge on the markets. And I think another very key element here is coupling of sectors. How do we organize coupling of sectors? What will be the future of the regulation? Think big, think blockchain. Think about the electrons going to be green, we are going to consume an electron where we'll be able to track in real time the renewable component of that electron. So the same will happen with heat. So when you will distribute heat, your heat system will use combination of source, part of it being electricity again. So how can we build that integrated systems around these new notions of green electrons or green calories or whatever you want in an integrated way across heat, electricity, gas, and transportation systems?
Thank you. Gert?
Well, I'm really positively surprised by the, for me, fundamental change I hear from ENTSO-E. And I really, from our part, we are completely open to cooperate then more intensively if this is the vision that sector coupling is a solution. Because so far, this was not what we in reality felt was a strategy coming from the large electricity TSOs, but very happy that this change is taking place. This being said, we should be very careful of making big declarations and then having a legal package being decided at EU level, which decides on electricity only. We should be very careful on what is in the package on district heating and cooling with TPA as a general principle, with customers as a general principle that should be allowed to leave at any moment. Same problem is there for biogas, where as I said, biogas is very nice, it should be promoted, and then when you read the little details, then you see that the main technologies are being excluded from being renewable after 2021. Just to say that there is a general atmosphere or electricity feeling throughout the package that we should be very careful about if we want to realize the coupling that Laurent also supported just before.
Thank you. Bill?
Thank you. I must say I'm a little bit out of my depth with all these policy guys who really know their stuff. I'm a basic, humble engineer, and all I can see is stuff not working. I would put in a plea, because I don't think I can stop it. The district heating that's going in the UK should be much, much better. It should be transparent as to how much energy it's using and how much CO2 it's producing and how much it costs. And that isn't happening very well at the moment. I think that there are other district heating systems or district energy systems which aren't necessarily based on pumping hot water around. And I came from a very interesting session before where we were looking at magnesium chloride as a vector. I think there are other vectors apart from lumping some hot water around. And I would like to see that innovation happening in a way before we start investing all this money in big pipes in the ground, which might be the wrong ones.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm not going to give you a conclusion. I think the conclusion you will make yourself. This was more or less teasing for the next sessions. I hope you found it interesting. We tried to do something rather unconventional, which was instead of having polite people coming from the same industry, coming to the conclusion that they agree. We had very polite people coming from different industries, supposed to have very different views. And you see that at the end of the day, with some exceptions, of course, because we need exceptions to make the rules, we have quite a lot in common. And I wish some policymakers had attended this meeting, because they would have discovered that we might debate over 20% instead of 30 or 40, but at the end of the day, many of us are here to build the same energy system of the future. And this is great news, and it should be translated in the policy, as was quite clearly pointed out. Again, I hope you appreciated it, but if it is the case, it is only thanks to our great speakers. They were, for many of them, out of their comfort zone, and they did it greatly. Thank you very much to them. And our next topic is coffee break.